Good afternoon, and for some of you, good evening. I know we have some of our participants who are viewing from abroad. My name is Eric Gutierrez, and I'm the Alumni Relations Director at Bank Street. I would like to thank and welcome everyone for attending and participating in this virtual event, and of course, for your continued support. It is great to see so many of our community members joining us for our panel discussion. It is definitely an honor and a privilege to welcome back 5 of our esteemed alumni to discuss this relevant topic. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how the discussion will run and how you can participate in today's event. The panel discussion will be moderated by Rabin Nickens, who I will be introducing shortly, and she will be providing questions to our panelists. You, as our guests, will have the opportunity to submit questions to our panelists by typing your questions in the chat box. You may send in your questions at any time during the discussion, and we will collect these and we will do our best to address them at the end of the discussion. Also, during the conversation, please feel free and encouraged to comment in the chat box. The event is being recorded and it will be shared with the audience following the event. In addition to the recording, you will also receive, if you have not already, a resources and bio booklet that has more information on how to get involved with alumni relations and the career services office. This booklet will also include resources and benefits that our offices provide to both alumni and students. I would also like to highlight 2 upcoming events that we have. The first one is tomorrow on April 8th. The Bank Street's Alumni Tutoring Network will be hosting a meeting to discuss tutoring activities and ideas to assist children ages 3 to 5 and children struggling in school. A link to the registration page will be posted in the chat box. And our next event I'd like to highlight is that on April 22nd, BASCA's Social Justice Committee will be hosting the event, Speaking to Our Shared Humanity, Visual Narratives of Life in the Time of COVID and Black Lives Matter. A link will also be shared in the chat box with the registration page, and this page will also include details on how to submit your artwork if you're interested, which is due on April 12th. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for this evening. Rabin Nickens is an award-winning author, speaker, journalist, leadership coach, and consultant who is a trusted thought partner for leaders in education and other fields within the US and abroad. She draws from success in diverse roles such as classroom teacher, mayoral advisor, senior school improvement specialist, and her current position as director of special programs within the New York City Department of Education, activating excellence for all 32 districts across the largest school system in the country. Rabin is also the author of The Playmaking Way, Using Dramatic Art to Support Young Readers and Writers, The Leadership Guide to Designing Professional Learning, and she's featured in Racially and Ethnically Diverse Women Leading Education, A Worldview. She earned her Master's of Education from Bank Street College, holds an EDD in Education Leadership, and is currently a doctoral scholar at Columbia University. Please join me in welcoming Rabin Nickens. Thank you, Rabin.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you so much for everybody joining us today. Oh, you are in for a treat. And I have to give a shout out to Susan Levine, Director of Career Services, because she always brings such wonderful resources and programming to help us Bank Street alum, not just while we're in school, but afterwards, even though I graduated a long time ago. Thank you so much. Again, this career advancement panel is really for you. Some of you are already in positions and feel stable, but just wanna, just make sure that you have a plan B, C, or D. And some of you may be uncertain right now. So as I get ready to introduce our panelists who are really extraordinary, I want you to just listen to their bios and think about where you see some threads of connection. Like, where do you see some of your own journey in their journey? Because you're gonna listen and you're gonna be really, really impressed. But remember, they all started somewhere and they're still evolving, they're still changing, as we'll see right now. So first, I'm gonna ask for Marcel Deans to turn his camera on. Marcel Deans is an assistant superintendent serving as the Bronx Borough Leadership Director. In this role, Marcel supports the executive superintendent, community superintendents, and borough citywide offices in developing leadership pipelines and talent within their districts and their schools. Now, through this work, he's charged with learning about the individual needs of each district and school, and to serve as a point contact for identifying school leaders for district vacancies. He uses this learning to also support districts by informing and modifying existing leadership program curricula. So we're talking about the adult learning here. Marcel also serves as faculty for the Leaders of in Education Apprenticeship Program. Some of you in NYC know that as LEAP. And it's a year-long principal training program that has been developing impactful school leaders for over 10 years. Marcel holds an MA in Educational Leadership from Bank Street College, go Bank Street, a BA in History from Columbia University, and is currently a doctoral candidate in Fordham University's Graduate School of Education. So thank you and welcome to Marcel. Next up, I'd like to introduce you to Maria Valentina Nunes. Maria has served as the Upper School Division Head at the Packer Collegiate Institute since July 2019. As the head of the Packer Collegiate Institute since 2019, July 2019, yes. Maria earned a degree in mathematics and economics from Yale University and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Now, following a 20-year international career, Maria followed her heart and decided to transition to a career in education, and we're so glad she did. In July 2012, Maria enrolled in Bank Street College. See how Bank Street just draws in the best and the brightest? Yes, in 2012, she enrolled in Bank Street College's graduate program in education, where her business career and experience as a parent helped her to think more expansively about pedagogy and school administration. After completing her degree in elementary education at Bank Street, Maria taught math at City and Country School and spent a rewarding 5-year tenure at the Spence School, where she taught math and economics and was a grade dean in the upper school. Yes, let us welcome once again, Maria Nunes. And next up, we have Mark Pingatore, who is coming to us from Barcelona. I'll probably be messing that up, although I spent some time in Catalonia a little bit. So Mark is a child of international schools, having lived and studied in Pakistan, Haiti, and Kenya. He has a degree in political science from Drew University and a master's degree in education, as well as a master's in administration from, you guessed it, folks, Bank Street. Yes, he spent 15 years in New York City as a teacher and head of school. Now, while working in New York City, he was given the opportunity to start a new school, Thompson Square Middle School, in 2001, that was later recognized as one of the top schools in the city. He became director of the American School of Barcelona, or ASB, in September 2009. And since ASB, he has been involved in the founding of Barcelona International School Association, BISA or BISA, and serves on the BISA board as the president. So yes, let's welcome Mark. And last but certainly not least, if Alice Schwartz can reveal herself, yes. Alice has a 37-year career at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, first as a full-time staff in education, and now as a contractual educator. She's also adjunct faculty at the School of Visual Arts, SVA, in Art History and Critical Studies Department, and at the Graduate School in Museum Education right here at Bank Street College. Schwartz continues to give talks and workshops online and in person at historic house museums, libraries, arts organizations, and travel with the Met. She had co-created digital media resources, including the award-winning Murder at the Met, an American murder mystery. Look it up if you haven't. Intriguing now. See, you know, we got the spice at Bank Street. We're giving you the spice. She has triple, in art history, and studio art with a minor in theater and an MS in museum education. I don't even know what to say. Everyone, let's welcome all of them. Alice, Mark, Marcel, Maria to this panel. Welcome, welcome, welcome. get your questions ready as we go on this journey with them. So I guess my first question is the one that has probably drawn most people to this panel today. Even before COVID, we see that you went through different iterations of yourself, right? So whether it's right now due to COVID or sometime in your career, what can you share with us and how you reinvented yourself for the workforce, for a career? Anybody can jump in.
I can start. I have a recent reinvention as I went from a business career into education. And the first part for me was just to follow your heart. I think each of us in those quiet moments know what drives our passions and where we find our purpose. And if what drives your purpose is different from what you're doing today, that's an indication that there's an opportunity for a transition. And then from there, it's to marry the heart with the head and be strategic about what that would take. So for me, I knew I had always been interested in education. And so as I was starting to think about a transition, I spoke to people I know or were introduced to people who were working in schools to better understand where were the skills and requirements similar to what I had, what were the gaps that I would have, and what would be the best way to make that transition. So for me, it was, since I had never been in a classroom, an opportunity to go back to school. And then I chose Bank Street because of the apprenticeship model, and it allowed me to fill in with actual, for example, teaching experience. But that would be the same approach, I think, for no matter what area. I've always found people are so helpful in speaking and to draw on an opportunity to understand what it is in a transition, and not to underestimate the skills that you already have or that you've built over time in the job or in the career or in the life experience you currently have that could help with a transition. I think our limits are only the ones that we put on ourselves.
I would say that while the global pandemic has taken so much from us, I think during this particular time period, I think what it's afforded me is this opportunity to sort of to take advantage of the silence a little bit. And I think one of the things that is really important in terms of reinventing yourself, and I think Maria kind of alluded to it, which is revisiting your why. Like, why are you doing this work? What is it that propels you? What is it that fuels you? What is it that will sustain you moving forward? And so I know for myself, one of those things has been continuing to go back and think about how I can move forward as a learner. And so part of, when you read my bio and going back and getting my doctoral or working on my doctoral piece at Fordham, I never saw myself going back to school again. And but because I sort of took advantage of the disconnect and the silence that was going on during this time, I was able to really sort of think about, and one of my whys is about, sort of moving the needle for Black, Brown, and economically disadvantaged young people. And so the way that I think I can increase my impact in doing that work across New York City or wherever is through going back and actually, going back to school and continuing to be a learner and push my own thinking and my own knowledge and understanding of the work ahead. So that's one of the things I would say.
I would add, just because we're in this time of COVID, and I'm speaking for the museum ed field, like everybody else, we shut down on Friday, the 13th of March last year. But for museum education staff, things took quite some time to transfer online. College and university, it was, over the weekend, and everything switched online. So I've somewhat been reinventing myself as to, and thinking of the silver lining. What is it that I can do online with engaging people with works of art that is actually much more difficult to do in person in a museum gallery? Thinking of objects that curators have in storage. It's not on view. And so, but I can dig in and put together a PowerPoint to show objects that are not on view objects that have gone off to an exhibition, objects that are in a conservation lab and not accessible in the galleries. I can, in a PowerPoint, put up an Islamic piece next to an Asian piece and compare color use and technique and subject matter, that within the Met's galleries, they're literally a fifth of a mile apart and they're not displayed together. So it's trying to find the silver lining of what can we do in this digital world that I can't do or is very difficult to do in person, and trying to continue in that positive trajectory, because I think, at least for the museum field, it's going to be a very, very long time before we go back to, if we ever do, fully go back to full groups of people in front of an original work of art with a full engagement for an hour. So it's getting myself up to speed and looking at the positive of what we can do online, what we can accomplish online.
So I would go back to what Maria said about heart first. I mean, I remember actually my first job, I worked for the United States Conference of Mayors, working with mayors. But what I really loved doing was I volunteered for an after-school program. And there were mentors from Howard University and American University working together for young kids in Washington, D.C. And I love that work. So I just decided to follow that. And then I would say the second thing is really finding a support network. So, I mean, I went to Bank Street because that's what I wanted, that foundation. And I always felt like a Bank Street was like a small family, really supporting you with your dream. And so every kind of jump I've made, I've always looked for supportive networks, and I've just been really fortunate. So working in New York City public schools, had really positive experiences and went around excellent educators, and then making the jump to overseas again. I think surrounding yourself with people that share the same kind of values as you do, and working together is kind of key in reinventing yourself each time, is having that support group.
And there was so many interesting or what I sometimes call sticky messages in what you said. I mean, as I'm thinking back on it, in terms of reinventing yourself, Maria talking about taking inventory of your skills. Sometimes we don't do that. We don't know what we have because we're so busy doing it. We don't always know how to articulate it and identify it. So like, that's a powerful sticky message. Or Marcel talking about having that learning stance. Sometimes we got to, go back to school, lifelong learners. We've learned that at Bank Street, but now, to what extent are we really putting that into practice? And then Alice talking about seeing that silver lining and taking advantage of what are some of the things we can do virtually that we wouldn't have been able to do in an in-person environment. Like, sometimes our work can transform in a better way because we are in this environment. And again, stop me if I'm wrong here, or jump in if you want to elaborate. But and then, Mark, talking about that whole idea of not your words, but mine, finding your village, going to your support network, particularly like-minded people, like folks in the audience. I hope you're taking notes. This was powerful advice here. But what would you say to some people who say, you know what, that's all well and good, but the bottom line is like, I need money, things are inconsistent. I want to follow my heart, but I have a mortgage to pay. I've got kids to feed, or I just have myself to feed. I might have things going on. Like, did you experience any challenges around that? Or do you have any perspective on, when, what you do when maybe just the economics of things make it challenging to do some of those things that you're mentioning?
I could start. I mean, I went to massive student debt. So, I don't know if, I just followed my heart, and then, over time things worked out, and, literally I'm just about to pay off all of my student debt. But I would do it again, because again, the experiences I had was worth it. And it was a little bit of a gamble. But I just feel privileged and rewarded to have the experiences I had. So it was kind of a big investment in my education, a little bit of a gamble, but it's all worked out. So I think for each person, there's some risk taking involved, but those are choices you make. So it's, I would push people to feel a little bit uncomfortable, even monetarily, if it's following their passion. But that can be easier said than done.
I think the other part is it's timing and planning. So I think, we're in a society where we want everything right away. And sometimes it might take a little while of saying you need to do some extra savings to put money aside, or take a little longer to do the studies because you need to work part-time in order to support yourself, or make some hard trade-offs in when and how you can make a transition. So I think there is not an easy immediate path, but it's again ranking what is most important to you and what sacrifices you would want to make in the short term in order to have a longer term change.
I mean, it's not to say that the economics aren't the only thing you have to consider, but for a lot of us, or for a lot of us out there, that's a very real consideration. Even before the pandemic, some of us really wanted to, expand our learning, go back to school, follow our heart, and even before the pandemic, felt like, well, I can't really do that. But maybe this is, in some ways, the pandemic is the push. Maybe that we need to take another path or open up a new chapter. I want to kind of shift to the social emotional part of this. How do you go about the self-care that's necessary, or the mental health support that you need in a time like this, because even outside of the career thing, there's just what's going on. And let's be real, we're not in just a disease pandemic, we're in a racial pandemic as well. So this is extraordinary times. So in the course of all that, you're trying to make sure that you have a stable career. What have you done to support yourself in terms of your mental and emotional state?
I think for me, I think part of the work has been recognizing that I'm not invulnerable. I think that in particular, being a Black man who was brought up in sort of this sort of a society that sort of said that you can't that you have to continue to push through, right? Like you can't show weakness, you can't show emotion, you can't do all these sorts of things. And so I think one of the things for me has been, and not just in the pandemic, but my journey has sort of led me to this place of understanding that that I am vulnerable, and that that I need to take the time to sort of be really conscious and vigilant when it comes to sleep and exercise and all the other habits and or routines that are counter to giving me the energy and overall joy just to continue to do this work. In particular, part of my work, as you mentioned in the bio, is around supporting and cultivating new leaders, and I can only do that if, in fact, or I can only do that well in an effective way if I put the mask on first, right, and demonstrate and model for them that that in order for you to do the work that you want to do for everyone else, you have to do the work for yourself first. And so we talk openly and honestly and all the time about sort of what that means for us as leaders, and that self-care is such a vital piece, and it's something that I continue to battle with and wrestle with for myself, and hopefully my transparency with them about my own journey is hopefully helping them as well when they're thinking about their own joy and passion and energy.
Mm.
I would add that I think mental health and self-care is important at all times in your life, not just during a pandemic or an uncomfortable moment. And if you think sort of the reverse, I think we would agree that a healthy mind and body often means that you're productive, you're successful, and what couples with that, I think, is that you're a happier person. And when you're out in the workforce, or you're with colleagues, or you're even on a Zoom meeting, I think that kind of happiness and feeling of productivity and successfulness kind of gives you this lovely aura. and people sense that in you. And something that we all, I think, or at least I remember learning from Bank Street, is the importance in a child, or I will say an adult, learning is through your senses. So I have made it, I literally have been in my apartment for over a year. I've gone for walks outside, but that's it. I haven't gone into any other building. I don't go physically to work anywhere. So every day, and I don't mean to simplify this, but every day I would strongly suggest that people think of their five senses and do something kind to those five senses. Listen to a piece of music that is your favorite, or add to your playlist and find a piece of music that you've never listened to before, but find it, you kind of like that tune. Do some kind of physical activity, even if it's walking within your apartment or home. If you can get outside, all the better. I think for our vision, it's important that if we're looking at a screen all day long, it's important to switch that eye vantage point. So to stand in your apartment or to go outside and look at the horizon, find the farthest thing away from your eyes and let your eyes train on that kind of distance. Dance or move, anything, taste something that you've never tasted before, or treat yourself to that little piece of chocolate or whatever makes you happy. And most importantly, laugh every day. Make yourself laugh, get a friend to make you laugh. I think laughter is extremely important, and what we're all striving for is this kind of this balanced feeling in our life. And I think when we're happy and feel balanced, we feel better about ourselves professionally, personally, and you'll exude that. And the last thing I will say is whenever you run into somebody, compliment them, thank them, make that tiny little connection with another human soul.
I would also just add, I mean, again, one thing Southern Europe does well is balance and family. And so I get a lot of sustenance out of actually being with, I have a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old, I have a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old daughter, and getting off the screen, being with them, that and my wife, it just brings meaning and a sense of perspective. So, I really like the sense of a family that Southern Europe kind of holds in warmth. And so that's kind of helped. And it was pretty tough in Spain last March. People were almost literally locked in their apartments. So I thought, again, that kind of sense of finding your village to find meaning and escape and reflect with. So that's really helped me during this time, and I think it helps a lot of people.
Yeah. And I think that, it seems like something that seems so obvious, that you should take care of yourself first, but it's something that sometimes goes by the wayside, especially if in the midst of looking for a job, or in the midst of trying to find more job stability, because just because you have a job doesn't mean that you feel stable. And maybe you don't like the idea of having a job. You want a career, you want something that you really like, in the midst of doing all that, and you're caring for others, and this is going on, again, that powerful message. Thank you so much, all of you, particularly Marcel. Put the mask on yourself first. Okay, and I know a lot of us haven't been on a plane in over a year, but you can't help anybody else unless you put the mask on first. But then that part that also Alice was speaking about just occupying your senses, but particularly because when you're doing a job search, right, you're doing it online, you are on a screen all the time, looking at these listings, going on LinkedIn, doing all this, having interviews. And, if you're currently employed, you're having all these Zoom meetings, all I want to do is Zoom, not anymore, because you're tired. You're tired of Zooming, so you got to protect your eyes. And again, these are the things that fall by the wayside. But so, I mean, it sounds like a lot of you during this time didn't necessarily have to go on a hardcore job search per se. But some of you, either tweaked what you were doing in your career, so you had to kind of transform, or you're supporting other people that are going through these career challenges. So what would you say would be one or two of the biggest lessons that you've learned about, during all this, during these unpredictable times, whether it's a lesson about the job search, or a lesson about the market, or making yourself marketable, or resilience during this time, like either for yourself or other people that you've engaged with in terms of the career and the job market?
I think it's interesting. We've been doing a lot of hiring. I mean, I think this is a moment of transition in a lot of schools. People who are near retirement have decided this is the year to retire. And I think what comes across most strongly is authenticity. And I think it's what Marcel was referring to earlier as well, and Alice, that who you are, if you're just in yourself and exuding kind of a presence, that jumps out of a Zoom screen. And I think given all that we've been going through as a society, we're hungry for connections with other humans. And you connect more strongly when you feel that someone is being authentic with you. And so I think everyone is human. We've had, those days when the Zoom doesn't work or a connection didn't, and someone who is able to just laugh and roll with it exudes that kind of resilience. I think that we're all looking for in each other as we're traveling through these more difficult times together. And we're constantly, I think, asking ourselves as leaders to model for others what it means to be human, in order to model it as well for students. And I think that's what we're looking for in other adults, to say there is no perfection right now. We're constantly reminding each other we are in a pandemic. We are always reinventing how we need to do everything. And there are days that are hard and there are days that are silver linings, but these are the days we have. And it is still possible to enjoy ourselves and enjoy each other. And as Alice was saying, have a laugh, learn something new, but bring ourselves kind of authentically with each other.
Yes.
So,
I mean, that's definitely oh, I'm sorry.
no, it's okay. I was.
Oh, no, go ahead. Speak, please.
I was giving grace to see if Alice or Mark wanted to speak to
Oh.
it. But so interesting enough, I was in a conversation with one of the executive superintendents the other day in New York City, and what she shared was the fact that so many people aren't raising their hand, right? Like aren't showing up in spaces and making it known, one how dope they are, two, that they're ready for additional challenges and they're ready and willing to take risks. And so, part of it is just, that folks have to show up and they have to raise their hand and say, I'm ready to take on these additional challenges. And one of the things that she says she's seeing a lot across the landscape is that folks aren't willing to leave sort of a safe and comfortable space that they're in currently, in order to, again, sort of increase their impact, their reach, but potentially be in sort of, not such sure footing. And one of the things that she's looking for folks to be real go-getters, to be innovative, to be problem solvers, to be, willing to step up to the opportunities, because there are going to be massive opportunities in New York City. I mean, we talked about it prior to the pandemic, that there were going to be a fair number of, in terms of on the leadership level, so many retirements and people moving on, that we were talking about, we were going to need up to 200 principals sort of to fill the void. And so now with the pandemic, that's only exacerbated things. And so there are going to be opportunities up the wazoo for folks who are willing and able to step up to the challenge that leadership sort of demands.
I mean, maybe I would just add, I think maybe this experience for many of those who are watching, I mean, they feel uneasy now, and they also feel a little bit stuck given what's happened in the past year. And I think if people are interested in exploring internationally, right now, many educators in the international world are kind of staying put, but I think as soon as COVID clears a bit, I think people are going to want to move. And so I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for people who are interested and taking a jump overseas. And so I think the international education world is actually a big secret out there. That's for those of people, and we spoke about it earlier, people who feel like because they either have debt or money is something they feel like they need. There are opportunities in the Middle East or Asia. There's people who want a different cultural experience in South America, Europe, or Africa. Those are options. And there's lots of really good schools with, I would say, progressive, like-minded people. And I think a lot of people just don't know that those opportunities exist. And so, I hope people who have felt uncomfortable and feel a little stuck, I would explore the international world. I think it's a great opportunity, particularly at this time.
And actually, I was wondering, Mark, could you expand on that a little bit? Because I think that that's something sometimes that gets overlooked. Probably the majority of people on this Zoom meeting are Americans or have lived in America for a long, long time. America, as in the U.S., because we know there's also Canada, Mexico, and the Americas. How do you, what would you say, either from your own experience or in supporting others, is a way to get into the international market? Like, how do you find out? Like, I co-sign what you're saying, because as a consultant, as a leadership coach, as a consultant, it was interesting how from month one, people reached out to me to do workshops in Department of State, North Africa, Europe, about what is New York doing. I work within the New York City Department of Education right now. What is New York doing? Because we are the biggest school system in the US, but as much as the American school system and some of our education programs, because we're also, of course, including our arts programs, our museums programs, as much as sometimes our education programs are maligned, the fact of the matter is there's a lot of people who admire what we do around the world and would see somebody that has that experience, whether it's because of the English language proficiency or critical thinking. I've also been asked to speak with educators in Korea in particular about the whole idea of how we support creativity, right, in critical thinking. So yeah, a lot of people, a lot of Americans don't know that they got it going on. There's a lot of, so Mark, can you speak a little bit more to it? Like, okay, so you're telling us go out there and look, but how do we do that?
Well, there's several search kind of agencies, and they have fairs in Boston or New York and different regions. So for example, there's an organization called Search Associates. There's another one called International School Services. And literally, if you Google them, they have annual fairs, and international administrators want people from New York because they value the educational systems within New York relative to some other states. And also I would, say that international schools are looking to be more diverse as well. And I think there's more of a diverse workforce in New York. And so again, those are, I think those are all things that help. I think being in New York City and being in a kind of international, New York City is an international city, and it's an urban environment. And so I think people coming from the New York school system are in a really strong place to enter international schools. And so when you go to those fairs, what happens is you literally can meet 30, 40 schools, and they post what positions they have. And so, I would highly recommend people going to those fairs. It's not a one-day fair. It's like it happens over 3 days. And so, it's kind of, I don't know if it's scary, but people within 3 days are deciding where they're going to live somewhere else in the world for a few years. But it's invigorating. I think being around a bunch of people that are kind of alive like that, it's exciting, and it's a little nerve-wracking. But the best way I think to do it is either reach out personally to it. If you have your eye on a certain school, reach out to that school. But otherwise, I would go to these fairs, and you can meet the administrators firsthand and find out more information.
And similarly, just as Mark kind of shared, like from his perspective as being somebody on the on the international education field, what would be the in into that. I think I would ask the rest of you as well, particularly like, for example, Alice. I'm sure there's people listening to Alice and thinking, what a glamorous life. She gets to be in her abode and share arts, and bring forth, we envision some ancient piece of art that nobody was able to see, up until now, thanks to the pandemic. And Alice gets to bring that to the world. So like, what are the opportunities right now, especially because museums, are closed? So it's like, on the one hand, we're listening to you and we're hearing, wow, there's new ways in which the work of museum education has flourished during the pandemic. But on the other hand, there's things that will never be the same. So like, so a question for you about how, if there's people out there, and again, by the way, I didn't want to just aggrandize New York City. I'm a typical New Yorker. So all of you from other parts of the country, you rock too. But so there's that question for you. Maria, I want you to get ready, because then we want to switch it over to you from the independent school world. Like, what are, maybe there's some people who've always wanted to, but they're like, oh, their doors are definitely closed now. And then Marcel is my fellow NYC DOE. Like, what if there's some people, so if you don't mind, we kind of doing like a round robin. Thank you for setting it off on the international part, Mark. But Alice, take it away. Like, what are the opportunities in the arts or the museum education world right now?
Yeah, because I will say, obviously, because of COVID, the museum ed field was very hard hit this past year, and it still hasn't opened up. I mean, I myself lost more than half of my teaching this past year with no end in sight for that. But what I will say is, yes, of course, I'm very fortunate to be able to work at the largest institution practically in the Western Hemisphere, the Met, and be here in New York City. But what I often tell grad students and even the college students that I'm working with is, unless you're wed to New York because of family or a partner's job or something like that, really think, of course, internationally, as Mark was saying, but even think within our own United States. There are fantastic museums across this country, small and large and medium, of variety that are in much more affordable towns and cities, number one, so that the finance kind of works itself out. I started in historic house museums, teeny tiny museums that had, per salary for maybe 2 or 3 people. There's lots of variety out there for people in the museum ed field to do the same kind of quality teaching. And I've really been using these past year in this extra time, thinking a lot about the importance of time and how we spend it. And I think one great way to spend time for those of you that want to go into the museum field is randomly choose museums across the country. Get to know their collection, get to see what they do online, because I think that's been very telling in the museum field. There are some museums, and it's not always the big, giant, well-known museums. Some of the smaller museums across our country are doing phenomenal work online and transferring what they can do in person that suits the size of their institution, the kind of collection they have, their surrounding environment. So one, I would spend quality time seeking out museums, what they already do on a quality level. There are organizations, American Association of Museums, there's the New York State Association. There are lots, and these are all free. Most of them are free. You can become a member. You don't have to pay a lot of money. And they have full websites. I can't tell, I mean, probably practically every day I'm on some kind of free webinar of museum staff across the country. And it's just bit by bit peeling away at what is out there. What city might I want to go live in? What kind of institution do I want to work in? And I'm hoping that the museum field really takes a long, hard look at the workload of staff. And I'm not just speaking for educators across the board. There are too many museums that look at programming as far as quantity as opposed to quality. And I'm hoping this time people can start to ratchet back and think about, again, in our workday, in our professional life, in our institution, how are we spending our quality time? And what are we offering our visitors in the best way possible? But there are resources out there as far as the museum field. And, before I forget, I would just add on that I think Mark had mentioned it before, but even Bank Street alum, there are a lot of me out there that have gone through the museum ed.
Yes.
I'm probably on the much older end of the spectrum since I graduated back in the 80s, but there are lots of graduate students that I've mentored over the years that are in very fine positions across this United States, as well as some international. And I know we love to talk about our field. So for those that are looking into museum ed that want to know more about it, reach out to us. I'm always encouraging that, even within a museum, reach out to the veteran curators and conservators and librarians and the brilliant minds within that, and just feed off of them like a sponge. Take in every little bit of knowledge that those older, well-skilled people have. You're not going to necessarily follow their style of work ethic, but you can take all of that information and make it into your own storyline. And at the same time, I'm saying to those of us that are older and veterans in the field, reach out to the younger people, reach out to younger people on your staff, within your institution, even in other departments, and find out from them, what is it that the younger mind is seeking and looking for? What kind of creative ideas are they bringing to the table? Because it's just as important as the person that's been in a business like me for 38 years. Those are my 2 cents.
See, you see what happens when you go ask Alice? We think she'll know. She sure enough does know. Oh my gosh. Alice, first of all, thank you for those gems. Before we move on to Maria, so much. First of all, you already got me thinking about another alumni event, because when we talk about the village, we're Bank Street. We have a village. It's right here. We don't have to go somewhere else. I mean, so we have the village right here. And I remember when I came into Bank Street in 2000. Oh shoot, it's been 20 years. 2001. We talked about the museum programs, and what Bank Street produced for museums, so much more. And if you go and you look at museums, and also libraries as well, if you look at a lot of arts institutions around the country, you will see peppered throughout Bank Street grads who, as you said, I have not met one that hasn't been so happy to see me or hear from me or talk to me. So that's a word. And definitely, Eric, maybe we need to talk about some of that. But also, I would like the audience to take in consideration two things that Alice had said. Sometimes when you're looking for a job and you're basically doing your due diligence about the organization, which is what she's talking about. Look and see what they do online, look and see what their culture is, because it's evidenced by what they put out there. Sometimes when you see something that might be lacking or something that they might need help with, that's your in. So when she was talking about the whole idea of, quality over quantity, right? We know that a lot of museum education programs are trying to partner with schools and support them. So if you're, for example, an educator right now, they might not have people who are practitioners, and that could be your selling point to some of these museums. Also, something she had mentioned, I might not be quoting you verbatim, Alice, but just thinking about the technology. So if you're, especially those of you that are like in the classroom or work within schools, you've probably over the course of the year figured out all sorts of cool things to do with Flip, Snack, Zoom and the Doom, name the app, that maybe some of these museums, some of our more mature museum educators, maybe they're not as familiar with, and then you come along and you're like a godsend. So definitely please take what she said and put that in your interview and your cover letter toolkit, and remember to share that. But Maria, okay, while Alice is living the glamorous art life, you're in the independent school, what what could you tell us about getting into that field or marketing yourself in that way?
So I think like the museum world, there are lots of Bank Street grads that have gone into independent schools as well as, you know, public charter and museums. So the education is recognized and the skills are really valued. I think and I know there's been more fluidity also over the last number of years between people who have been working in public or charter schools and independent schools. That the value of your experience, so those out there who have never worked in an independent school and are further along in their career, there is a recognized value of your experience in the public school system, in independent schools. So I would not say to yourself, oh, those are two separate tracks, and if I've gone down a public school track, I could not go the other way. That's not true at all. And there are many different types of independent schools. I think the same, and there's a variety of public schools. So it's important to look at the mission of each school and the educational philosophy of each school to determine whether there's a match between your personal philosophy and view of education and the one that the school holds. The best place to find that is on each school's website. And there are organizations. So the New York Association of Independent Schools, so NYSAIS, the New York State, so NYSAIS, as well as NAIS, the National Association of Independent Schools, which are great resources. And you can Google each of them. They have websites. They have an overview, and you can find lists of all of the independent schools, as well as job bulletins that list job openings in all of the schools. And you can search by region and by type of school and by type of position as a starting point. And then if there's a job that seems interesting to you, I would go directly to that school's website. Jobs are also posted there, but the website will give you more information about the school's mission and the type of families they serve and the philosophy. And then I would have confidence in applying. So a regular application is a letter and your resume. And Marcel had been saying earlier that schools are looking for people who are stepping up and wanting to do things and have a sense of initiative. And it's no different in independent schools than in public schools. So if there's something that intrigues you, I would say go for it. And there are lots of opportunities that are there.
Thank you. And thank you for just reiterating that, you know, education is education. I think, and I forgive me, audience, if I made it sound like, you know, independent schools are here or here, and traditional public schools, which I love, which I'm a product of, over here. As Maria said, you know, there's a lot more that we have in common. And one of the wonderful things about going to Bank Street, I remember, is that, you know, even though I was in a cohort program that was designed to bring, you know, skilled, talented educators to traditional public schools, I was sitting in the Bank Street class with a lot of people who were gonna go to independent schools. And you know, I had these stereotypes about, oh, the job must be really easy and cushy because you're at blah, blah, blah country day, you know, that sort of thing. Meanwhile, I'm in the community. I'm like in the, you know, in the places that a lot of people don't want to work. But, you know, as we were talking in Bank Street, that's one of the great things about, you know, Bank Street community, that even if you graduated, we need to take advantage of. They were telling me some things that those young people in their independent schools were going through, that even if it didn't look the same, you know, they still are teenagers. They still have hormones going. There's still little kids that want their parents around. Sometimes, you know, the more affluent parents are not as around anymore. And also, not every young person that goes to an independent school is affluent, you know? And so, you know, to what extent do we, when we look at our skills, you know, maybe we might be intimidated about going for an independent school position, or looking into that, and not knowing that basically if we're good at supporting education, we're good at supporting, you know, children and parents, then that's going to translate anywhere that you go. So thank you so much for that, Maria. And I say my colleague only because you know, we're the only ones working right now in U.S. Traditional public schooles. But you know, what would you say to people about the market, especially because people might say now, well, aren't we broke? Isn't the city broke? Like, are there any jobs out there? Like, what do you have to say about that?
Yes, we are broke. No, I think that
Rich in character.
always. And so one of the things that I think that I've been doing a lot of, and even before I got into my doctoral program, is trying to absorb as much content as I possibly can about what's next, like what's going to be our new normal. And our past chancellor was, and our current chancellor are the incomparable Misha Porter is leading us in conversations about what we've learned throughout this pandemic, how we can take those learnings and turn it into and turn it into creating transformational spaces that really meet the needs of our population. And Rabin, you spoke about it earlier, which is one of the things that this is, the pandemic has kind of surfaced, is that we've had inequitable services and provided inequitable education for so many of our marginalized populations. And so we have to do things differently moving forward. And I know in the chat, someone mentioned, like, are there going to be opportunities for teachers moving forward, or additional teachers? And I think part of what the chancellor is pushing us to do, and those of us who work on the central level and are supposed to be coming up with strategy moving forward, is like, how do we maximize adult capacity, right? Like, how do we ensure that all the adults that are in young people's lives have greater responsibility and accountability and connection with kids? Because we are going to have to not only deal with the opportunity, finally deal with the opportunity gap, but we're also going to have to deal with the social emotional trauma that so many of our young people have gone through. And so, one thing I think, and again, this is the world according to Marcel. I think that there will not be I think there will be greater opportunities for educators to get into the field, into public education. I know from a leadership standpoint, one of the things that my office is charged with is re-envisioning sort of not only the central-based leadership development programs for the various talent groups, right? So how are we getting people who are teachers into assistant principal roles and assistant principals into principals roles, but making sure that they're ready, right, for those opportunities when they do arise. And one of the approaches that we're currently thinking about or that we're currently engaged in, is how do we make sure that those strategies and those solutions are geographically based. And so, when Chancellor Porter was the executive superintendent for the Bronx, I worked really closely with her office to ensure that all leadership pipeline work that we were doing here in the Bronx was specific for the Bronx, right? Because a person who is a leader here or a teacher here may need sort of different competencies to sort of really do the work, to do the Bronx work, right? And those people in Brooklyn will need those particular competencies to do the Brooklyn work. And so, that's part of our strategy and our approach at this point, is to really make our leadership pipeline and teacher pipeline work being really specific to the geographic area. And we're going to come knocking. We're going to come knocking at people's doors and say, and try to find the talent that are in the various pools and try to push them and ensure that they're developing in along a trajectory that allows them to be really ready for the work moving forward.
Yeah. And it makes me think about what you said about, not raising your hand. And, for those that are interested in public education, particularly if they're interested in NYC-DOE, hearing what Marcel said, it means you got to be ready to raise your hand, because when they do come knocking, are you ready to articulate what you bring to the table? So even if there's not an opportunity right now, like a lot of times we just do that in life. Like, I wish, okay, boom, here's the opportunity. But are we ready? So, you've got, Mark told you what you needed to do for the international. Alice told you what you needed to do for the arts and museums. Maria told you. She done told you what you needed to do for the independent. And Marcel just broke it down for the schools. Also, I think something really important to think about what Marcel said is that, if you've only been thinking about teaching, it might be time to expand your scope, maybe to think about leadership or going into administration, or again, something outside of schools or outside of this country. So all of those things kind of come into play. We're about to actually move it to our audience with the wonderful help and coordination of Susan Levine, Director of our Career Services. But I just wanted to mention one other thing. We have, and just kudos to Eric, our wonderful alumni director, for bringing together such an awesome panel from our village. Our peeps go wide, people. Don't forget, our look at this. Look at this. So kudos to him for that. But the one thing that we don't have represented on this panel today is entrepreneurship. Because that's all, and actually maybe all of us might have a little hustle on the side. I know I do. I'm an independent consultant, as well. I'm an author, and so we need to also think about that as an option as well. Sometimes, it's the time to, put out your own shingles, so to speak. There's a Bank Street alum that runs a educational consulting business called Options for College. His name is Keith Berman. You can look him up. And I remember, when I was, a new alum out of Bank Street, going to visit, and again, part of the village, just because we're both Bank Street people, I'm sure he would be very happy to speak to you about that. He actually teaches a course at University of California on starting your own educational consulting business. So just in case that's something that was floating around in your head or you never thought about, one other option. But I will end there and thank you all again before turning it over to the wonderful Miss Susan Levine. Where's she at? Oh, there she is. You're on mute. You're on mute. Susan, you're on mute.
Thank you all.
Oh.
Thank you so much. Here I am. Yes, and thank you all for being here. I so appreciate it. I just want to let you know that you can still put questions in the chat, and we are going to try to get to most of them today. But if we don't, we will follow up. We will reach out to all of you, and we will try to answer all of the questions that have not been answered yet. Oh, see, they're still coming in here. So just give me a second to find, to get to the questions, and I will be right with you. I lost my way for a second, of course. Okay, I could do them actually from here then. I'll do them here from now. This is great. Okay. There's been some great comments in here as well, but the first question is, what are some suggestions for forging a new career in a place you don't know anyone? My 24-year career has always been in New York City, and now I live 100 miles north where I don't know anyone in the school system. I'm completing my leadership degree and trying to figure out the best way to reach out and begin making connections and building relationships. I know Bank Street on the resume for sure opens doors. Anyone want to take that one on?
Well, I'm wondering
Again, I would just say that in the international world, many people don't know anybody. They're literally moving to countries where they don't know anybody. And so it's really having the courage to go to an international fair or reach out to a place that you're interested in working at in a school and making those connections. And what often happens is actually people kind of get hired in cohorts and they often bond together. So you might be with a group of 15 new colleagues from all over the world, and again, you're creating deep connections with people you never knew before. But the first step is kind of what Marcel said about taking initiative and making yourself vulnerable and connecting with either hiring agencies or connecting schools directly. But I'm just telling you, in the international world, there's plenty of people who know nobody in a country they're moving to. So it happens all the time.
Thank you.
I would say the same in the independent school world. I would just look at what schools are in the area where you're looking to live, and look at the website, see who has job listings, and reach out. And you never know when people are constantly looking and what might happen, and what opportunities you might uncover that way.
Thank you.
I was just going to add, I wonder if there's a Bank Street grad in your area. 100 miles north of New York City, and that maybe Bank Street could actually connect you with somebody who might be in your area that you could talk with. I would also be bold wherever you have moved to, if you want to stay in the education field, of reach out to local schools, local libraries, even small museums. There are a ton of them in New York State, about 100 to 200 miles north of New York. See what's out there already in your community. And yeah, I think there's a moment when you've got to be bold and step up to the plate and show your value. And you're right, I'm just noticing the chat. Bank Street on anybody's resume is huge gold stars across the board. People know Bank Street, know the reputation, and I think it often jumps people to the front of the line in some cases for interviews.
For sure. Thank you. That was great.
And the only other thing I would add, and because this happens often, is people find me on LinkedIn all the time. And so how can you use the technology to sort of help support, this idea of making connection, right? And so folks who are looking for leadership positions typically, find me on LinkedIn and send me, don't just try to make a connection with me, like actually write in there, like sort of what you're looking for, so that I know, sort of the ways in which to move and to whether or not to accept the friend or the connection or what have you. But yeah, making sure that you're making those connections possibly through tech is important as well.
Yes, that's excellent. Thank you. All right, let's get to the next one. Thank you all for that. In order to strike out into a creative aspect of education as a freelancer, how do I best market oneself?
So my clarifying question would be, is a freelance what? Like, what exactly are they trying to do? I mean, nowadays there's like, websites like Fiverr that are, for people to freelance. But then also, I think, Susan, isn't there like a networking board or something that the Career Services has, or a bulletin board that where people can put up, or if there isn't, here's an idea. To put
We
up.
did have that in the past, and I know that sometimes the alumni also do some of these things where they get together and for networking purposes. So I'm not exactly sure what this particular person was asking, but I can reach out to her as well and try to support her as well.
Sure, but I would say, and of course everybody else, feel free to jump in. But nowadays, and I say nowadays because I set up my freelance independent thing a long time ago, and so now a lot of it for me is word of mouth. But I also am now thinking like, okay, how do I leverage this online thing, more than I did before, because I was so used to doing things in person. And so again, things like Fiverr, but also social media. Again, something that I am trying to learn to leverage is more, we don't think of LinkedIn as social media, but in some ways it is. And, one little trick or something that somebody had told me one time is that even in your LinkedIn title or your program, like make it not just a job title, but what you do, what value you add. So, because people are browsing. Even in your, your Instagram or your Twitter, in your, your title or your the little bio space, that's the new, that's the new networking, and I'm saying new, I'm showing my age, but that's where it's at sometimes when it comes to you being freelance, and you, not being famous, so to speak. But that's just my take on that.
That was great. Thank you so much. How do you suggest we go about looking for a new teaching position during the pandemic? Will being a remote teacher for the full year be a deficit?
Yeah, I think there's people who've been remote teachers all over the world. I mean, actually, Spain's been really fortunate. We've been more on campus than most countries, but that's, I think, again, the silver lining is, your tech skills, I imagine have increased greatly, and you probably now have some different ways to connect with kids and families that you didn't have before. And so, you're remote. I mean, there's so many educators who who are experiencing that. I would, I'd want to hear about how you made the most of that. But I don't think that's a deficit at all.
No, we did all of our hiring so far, and we're still in the hiring season, but it's all been done over Zoom. So demo lessons are remote, all interviewing is remote. So that is not a hindrance at all.
Yeah, I would echo the same sentiments as Maria and Mark. And in terms of the New York City Department of Education, like, you can go on our website and see, and we haven't fully entered the teaching hiring cycle at this point. But something that Maria said earlier, which is an important piece, and when I was a school leader, I used to always look for making sure that there's great alignment between the schools that you're applying to and your own personal mission and vision for the work, right? And so, and ensuring that the communication that you're sending to a particular school sort of highlights that and surfaces those connections, and why this particular school is a good fit for you versus sort of just the random, hey, here, I'm looking for a job, here's my resume, but really sort of making it personal and highlighting that connection.
Very helpful, thank you. The next one, actually, Marcel, this one was directed to you. Is the New York City Department of Education making plans for mental health support in the form of more staff for early childhood classrooms across the city when young children return, hopefully full-time in the fall?
Yeah, so I kind of mentioned this earlier because I was sneaking a peek at the chat here and there, but that has been a priority for us in terms of reaching out to our partner CBOs and other mental health providers to ensure that we're growing capacity in that space to provide what we know our young people are going to need when they return back from or when we get back to whatever the new normal is going to be. And so whether or not it's going to involve additional folks, I think it absolutely will. But again, I think that will, budgets, individual budgets and for schools will probably dictate to what degree that additional staff is required.
Okay, the next question is about returning to the classroom teaching after being away for a while and how to go about applying.
I think this would coming back into the workforce is a period of transition. So it's, I think in some ways like making a career change between what you were doing in the period that you left teaching. And so I think, again, starting with an understanding of what skills you have, and it may be that you've developed other skills or had other experiences in the intervening years that could support an application to get back into teaching. So I would approach it in the same way as you were looking for a job, and consider the years previous as another work experience that you had, and make an argument of how those support the skills that you would bring to a school or a classroom.
I would also add, as somebody that supports school leaders who are, trying to develop the teachers that they have right now. If you haven't been teaching for a while, it depends on what school. And when I say school, I don't mean like Bank Street, because obviously, everybody here is a Bank Streeter, but what type of school of thought what about teaching was at the school that you were at. So if you have a background where it was, oh, teaching is basically telling, right? And as long as I know the content, like I'm a science teacher and I know science, that's going to be my biggest selling point. You need to shift gears, because these days what it's about is engagement with students, emotional engagement and cognitive engagement. Now, what I mean by that is that let's forget even COVID. The bottom line is that young people are going through a lot of stuff. They're going through a lot of stuff. You know, we can say, oh, urban youth or whatever. I don't care if you're a youth on the farm, they're going through a lot of stuff. So to what extent can you in your teaching make sure that some sort of social emotional attentiveness is built into that? To what extent can you make sure that your instruction is culturally responsive to the students that are sitting in front of you? And cultural responsiveness is not just for children of color, it is for white children as well, who need mirrors into other cultures, because most of the text in the curriculum is built around the majority culture. So to what extent can you actually really engage with students on an intellectual level, you know, really get them to be doing the talking, to get them to be really interested in what's going on, and on a cultural and emotional level. So that might, again, now if you haven't taught for a long time, but you're like, oh, Rabin, you know, that's how I was teaching back in the day, fantastic. But we know that sometimes there's a little bit of old school teaching that, you know, that's like, okay, teacher sits here and talks and talks and talks and talks. And what's going to happen is that your students will never turn on the camera. You will never see them. They might never log on, because also understand, by the time that you seek a job, even in the fall, there could still be schools that are still either remote or hybrid. So there's going to be some form of remote teaching some of the time. So engaging them via this thing is not the same thing as in person. But again, I would just emphasize that, you know, if you haven't taught for a long time, just really pull from your skills that are not just about the content that you know, but how to engage and really get students into the lesson through culture, through social emotional attentiveness, that sort of thing.
And can I add on to that, that it even goes back to the question we talked about before of how you reinvent yourself. And I would say for all of us that are in the profession or trying to get into the profession or transferring from one occupation to another, that reinventing or teaching in a different way should be this ongoing process as a life teacher and a life learner. And so I see too many, I can say in the museum field, I see too many educators or even university professors that have been teaching Italian Renaissance painting for the past 15 years. And I've got my course down and I'm just going to keep teaching the same paintings in the same method. And that not only makes you stale as an educator, but my gosh, your audience isn't getting anything out of that. And so I would challenge, particularly now when those of us in the museum ed field have a little bit of wiggle room, a little bit of time to rethink, what are we teaching? Literally, what objects? How are we teaching it? How can I switch it up? How can I teach that same favorite painting, but come at it from a completely different angle that's going to be responsive to the audience with me? Those of us in the museum field know that what's different from a classroom teaching is we have 1 hour with a group of people, young or older, and that's probably the only time we're ever going to see them in our life. So we've got that 60 minutes to 90 minutes to engage them, to get to know them, to be responsive to their needs, their interests. Everything from, you know, a person who's never stepped foot in the museum all the way up to the veteran. And you want everybody to feel comfortable and give them the tools so that they can come back to that institution and look at works of art on their own without you. But reinventing and making it fresh, whether you're getting into the job market or you're still there after decades and decades of teaching, we owe it to ourselves, and more importantly, we owe it to our audiences to keep that fresh and ever changing.
Well said, Alice. Thank you. I just want to, it is in the chat, but please use the Bank Street LinkedIn page. It's a great way. I know someone reached out and asked if there was a way of reaching out to Bank Street admins, and the LinkedIn page is a great place to start. You can get that information there. And networking and Bank Street. No one. I always share this story with people that students come to me often and they want to relocate to another part of the country or even sometimes the world, and they want to reach out to Bank Street alum. So in the past, I used to get the names of Bank Street alum who were in different parts, you know, where they were looking to meet, and I'd reach out 5 or 6 people, and I'd, you know, introduce myself and say, I'm in career services. I'm working with a student that's looking to move to your part of the country. Can I share your contact information? And every single time, maybe 5 out of the 6 people I reached out to would answer me within an hour with their contact information. And it just shows you that Bank Streeters are very special people, but they want to help and connect with each other. And it's a very, important tool. Networking is always is the way to go, but to network with colleagues or people that have been to Bank Street and understand where you're coming from, it's a pretty invaluable tool. And I certainly can help you. And I know Michelle Pfizer Peterson in the alumni office is also part of sharing that information with our students and alum to reconnect with other alum in different parts. So I just wanted to say that. And does anyone have any other questions before we wrap up for the, I don't see any more in the chat. I want to just reiterate, I think we got to all the questions, but if not, we will try to answer them after. If you have any questions for any of the participants, you can always email alumni@bankstreet.edu. I want to thank our panelists again for a wonderful and thoughtful discussion. And thank you to our viewers, and have a good night, everyone.